Night descended like a shroud over the city, cloaking it in a mantle of darkness that seemed to possess a life of its own. Gas lamps flickered on their poles, like lost beacons in a sea of black. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drag of something that should not be there. Joao, a man etched by life's hardships, locked the door to his makeshift attic room with a weary sigh. Rain lashed against the roof like clawed, bare fingers trying to penetrate the fragile shelter. A faint shiver ran down his spine, a premonition he tried to ignore. Stories circulating in dark alleys spoke of an ancient evil, dormant beneath the city's foundations. Whispers of profane rituals and dark pacts were dismissed as feverish delusions of lost souls. He poured himself a shot of cheap brandy, the burning liquid warming his stomach, but not his soul. The peeling wallpaper seemed to form faces in the dark corners, watching him with invisible eyes. Solitude was a burden, and tonight it felt even heavier. A subtle creak came from downstairs, a sound that didn't belong to the house in its state of disrepair. Joao froze, the glass in his hand trembling. The wind howled outside, but this sound was different, closer, more intentional. He lit a small kerosene lamp, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows that distorted reality. Each step down the creaking stairs was an act of courage against the fear that enveloped him like a cold web. The floor of the main room was covered in thick dust, undisturbed for months, perhaps years. Only a thin, sinuous mark crossed the surface, as if something had been dragged, leaving a trail of sinister moisture. A whisper. So low it could have been the wind, or the creak of old wood. But it came from within, from a corner where the shadows were densest, where the darkness seemed to pulse. Joao illuminated the corner with the lamp, the weak light unable to completely dissipate the darkness. There was nothing there but old, dusty furniture and the smell of mildew and something else. Something sweet and putrid. The whisper repeated, clearer this time, formed by a timbre that did not belong to a human voice. It was a cacophony of laments and profane promises, weaving an intrigue that coiled in his mind. Looking into the cracked mirror on the wall, he saw a glimpse of something behind him. A tall, slender figure, its features indistinct in the gloom. When he turned, there was nothing. The odor intensified, bringing with it a sense of unnatural cold that penetrated his bones. The air seemed thin, making it difficult to breathe, as if the shadows themselves were crushing his lungs. He decided to seek refuge in the street, anywhere away from that insidious presence. As he opened the front door, the sound of the rain abruptly ceased. The subsequent silence was more disturbing than the storm. The street was deserted, the gas lamps extinguished, plunging everything into total blackness. Only the pale moonlight, filtered by dense clouds, offered a spectrum of visibility. The shadows stretched and distorted unnaturally, seeming to writhe and creep along the sidewalk. They were not just the absence of light, but something malevolent, hungry. A silhouette flashed quickly down an alley, a dark shape that seemed to glide rather than walk. Joao felt an icy shiver run down his neck, the certainty that he was not alone. He quickened his pace, heading towards the harbor, where the constant bustle of a few boats might offer precarious refuge. The sound of his own footsteps echoed strangely in the sepulchral silence. As he approached the pier, he noticed that the harbor water was unnaturally calm, almost still, like a black mirror reflecting distorted constellations. An old fisherman, sitting on an overturned crate, watched the sea with vacant eyes. His face was a map of deep wrinkles, and a tattered cloak enveloped him. He did not move as Joao approached. "Good evening," said Joao, his voice hoarse. The fisherman did not reply, only tilted his head slowly, as if the sound had roused him from a deep slumber. His eyes were pools of darkness. A cold current hung in the air, different from the night's chill. It carried a salty, rotten smell, reminiscent of decaying seaweed and something else. Something metallic and disturbing. The fisherman finally spoke, his voice a dry, raspy rasp, as if his vocal cords were corroded by salinity. "They come from below, always from below. When the sea is this calm, it's a sign they are ascending." Joao looked at the water, the calm that had once seemed peaceful now taking on a sinister connotation. He saw a faint bubbling on the surface, almost imperceptible, in an irregular pattern. Ascending? Joao asked, dread beginning to settle in his chest. The fisherman merely pointed with a bony finger towards the black depths. A shadow moved beneath the water, denser than natural darkness, a contour that defied physics. It was large, shapeless, and seemed to be approaching stealthily. The whisper returned, now amplified by the reflection on the water and the murmur that seemed to emanate from the depths. They were intertwined voices, cold and ancient, promising terrible secrets and a desolate end. Joao recoiled, stumbling backward. The fisherman remained motionless, with a resigned look, as if watching a spectacle he had seen countless times before. A bulge emerged from the water, a dark, smooth tentacle that stretched towards the pier. It had no suckers, but its surface seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The shadows in the city streets seemed to gain strength, moving with purpose. He could feel their cold gazes fixed on him, even from a distance. The tentacle whipped through the air, moving with unbelievable speed. Joao dodged it by a hair's breadth, feeling a hum in the air where his head had been. More tentacles emerged from the dark water, a macabre and silent dance that foretold the unfolding nightmare. The fisherman merely closed his eyes with a low groan. The whisper was now a chorus of frigid voices, echoing in his mind, promising the dissolution of his sanity. It was an invitation to the abyss, a promise of oblivion. Joao ran back to the city, not looking back. The terror in his heart was a cold flame, fueled by the ineffable vision he had witnessed. The streets that had once seemed merely deserted now seemed alive with the malevolence of the shadows. They stretched and writhed, blocking his path, whispering promises of despair. He realized that every shadow, no matter how small, seemed to harbor an evil presence. The shadows under eaves, the shadows in corners, all watched. A shadow denser than the others detached itself from a wall and moved to intercept him. It had a vaguely humanoid form, but its contours were inconsistent, vibrating with dark energy. Joao threw himself aside, the lamp falling and extinguishing with the impact. The ensuing darkness was almost total, broken only by the pale glow of a notice in a shop window. The notice read in faded letters, "Do not trust what you see when the light goes out." The words seemed to pulse with a cold, cruel truth. He got up, his skin crawling. He felt the presence of the shadow entity closer, its coldness approaching him like a frigid mist. The whisper returned, this time directly in his ear, a voice that seemed carved from ice and despair. "You belong to us now. Your shadow is your new home." Joao squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the voices and the fear. He focused on the image of his small attic room, a refuge that now seemed infinitely distant and safe. When he opened his eyes, he saw the faint glow of his old house. It seemed more somber and decrepit than ever, but it was a safe harbor. He ran towards it, each step an act of defiance against the shadows that writhed and stretched towards him. They seemed to lament his escape, their whispers turning into howls of frustration. He reached the attic door and locked it with trembling hands. The creak of the wood sounded like music to his ears, a sign of protection against the horror outside. Sitting in the dark, trembling, he waited for dawn. But dawn seemed a promise too distant on a night that refused to end. The whisper never completely ceased. It was as if it had nested within his own mind, an unwelcome tenant that spoke in dreams and in the quiet of the night. He looked at the shadows in his room, now seeing them as more than mere absences of light. They were eyes, they were mouths, they were promises of an infinite abyss. A slight movement in the corner of his eye. It was always subtle, a shift in light he couldn't prove was real. But he knew it was. The smell of mildew and something putrid returned, stronger now, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. It was the smell of darkness solidifying. He closed his eyes again, yearning for a sleep that would not come. Sleep was a forbidden luxury, an invitation to the nightmares that awaited him. A dragging sound, low and repetitive, came from beneath the floorboards. Something was moving slowly, preparing to emerge. Joao opened his eyes. The faint moonlight, once a distant comfort, now seemed deadly, revealing the silhouette of something writhing on the ceiling. It was the shadow entity, its fluid form molding into something terrifyingly familiar, yet grotesquely distorted. A nightmare gaining substance. A whisper coalesced into a single voice, cold and ancient, promising that he would finally find peace in the void. Peace was the oblivion of self, the dissolution into darkness. The shadow extended a fluid appendage towards him, the darkness seeming to solidify into a final invitation. There was nowhere to run. In that moment, Joao's past, his regrets, and his fears seemed to converge into the darkness that enveloped him. He was no longer a man, but a part of the night. The last sound Joao heard was the whisper, no longer coming from outside, but echoing from within. The echo of a shadow that had become his own.